So I've been watching debates, and it's a complete nerd thing to do to watch debates among things that you already have your position and your anchor's sunk. I mean, my anchoring bias in these debates is so deep that it would take a theophany in order for me to actually change my mind. But, I've seen Jay Dyer debate some folks, and I've been following Jay for years. Jay was actually one of the first big, orthodox influencers, and I use that term loosely. But he was one of the first big orthodox personalities on the internet that really started drawing me in, and it's because both of us have a Reformed Calvinistic background in some ways. And when I would hear Jay start walking through the transcendental argument for God, because I was a little Van Tillian in the Reformed world, that stuck. Don't ask me to explain it. I'm going to mess it up. But transcendental argument for God was very much something that appealed to me as a Van Tillian. But I've been kind of spreading out from there. So I saw a debate between Ubi Petrus and Voice of Reason, which was very good. I watched Jim Bob do a couple of debates. And then I came across Andrew Wilson, and I had come across Andrew Wilson before, loosely, though I didn't know who he was, when he and Wes Watson got into it on a big panel or whatever. And I wasn't there for Andrew Wilson. I was there to watch Wes Watson get humiliated. Anyway, so Andrew Wilson does these debates. He's Orthodox guy, does debates, very interesting person, still in that same vein. But one of the points that he made that really kind of stood out was rights are just force. And when I got to thinking about it, I actually heard him talk about it with two different people. One of them was Tim Pool, and one of them was somebody on the Whatever podcast. But he's talking about with Tim Pool, and he says rights are privileges absent obligations. But what it really comes down to is force, and rights are really a proxy for force. He may not have used that. That's my wording of it. But we only really have rights in so much as we have force in order to enshrine those rights. And, within our own context of the United States, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, yada, yada, yada. Right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, Bill of Rights. We're really big on rights in this country. However, the justification for them is kind of interesting in that it's fairly axiomatic, and apart from divine command kit theory, you can't really justify them. But the fact that he was talking about force, and it got me thinking about it. It's like, well, that's actually true. I mean, Tim Pool is giving this idea that, you have the right to do his arguments. He's not a philosopher, he's a journalist. So he gets a pass on not having the most sophisticated argument at any given time. But he makes almost like this libertarian argument about, anything that you could do in the woods in order to keep yourself alive, you basically have a right to do. Well, that doesn't really give you right to speak, right, freedom of speech, things like that. But I digress. And really, rights only really make sense when speaking within the context of a social contract, because it's within the context of community and other people potentially trying to deprive you of certain privileges, and the community agreeing that we will use force in order to make sure that people cannot deprive you of these things, that you really start to get to what a right is. It's a privilege that the community has agreed upon to use force in order to preserve. And there you start to get a more functional definition of what a right actually is. And a right apart from force really isn't a right. So at a macro application, though, when we start to look at the liberal rules-based order, it's very interesting to see how the dynamics are shifting in a geopolitical climate. We have basically, since the end of World War II, the founding of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and things like that, we have agreed upon, for the most part, a liberal rules-based order in which certain countries are guaranteed certain things, certain people are guaranteed certain things. The UN recognizes certain rights, self-direction, autonomy, things like that for countries. But they don't really mean it. There was the appearance of it, but if you go back and you look, those things have been violated in countries repeatedly, in member countries of the UN. And what becomes interesting is those things only really make sense in the context of having the force in order to keep those rights viable. Which the force to keep those rights viable, has been the United States. For 80 years, give or take, the force of the UN, the rights enshrined in the UN Charter and the decisions made by the UN and all that, were basically dictated or predicated upon force available via the United States. Now, at some points, we had actors that did not want to play along with the liberal rules-based order, mainly the Soviet bloc, China, places like that. However, what kept them in check was force. It was actually mutually assured destruction. So the rest of the world got to enjoy these rights due to the threat of force. As we head towards the 90s, what we start realizing is that we enter this very unique time because the Soviet Union falls and China doesn't really have the economic engine during that time to really stand oppositionally to the United States. And we enter into this period that a lot of commentators will call the unipolar moment. And the unipolar moment meant U.S. hegemony was basically unopposed in any meaningful way. We could do what we wanted because who were you going to call in order to police us? When we went into Serbia, or when we went here, or when we went into Iraq. If you don't like it, tough, because you have nobody to call. The best thing that you can do is you can say, that's not fair. You're violating their country. You're violating their rights. We agreed not to do this. And when we look and we bring that into the modern era, the very recent history, we basically see Russia adopting that same posture. All of these, almost playground arguments against what Russia has done rely on, that's not fair. This isn't what we agreed to. You're not playing by the rules. There are arguments that you could hear on any playground at any elementary school. You're not playing by the rules. That's not fair. But there's no teacher to go appeal to. So it's very interesting that as the unipolar moment has eroded, and when we begin to recognize that all these rights that we've agreed upon in a multinational, international social contract are all predicated upon the force in order to keep them whole and to keep them enshrined as universal, when that force is opposed, even if it's only credibly opposed, because at best it would be a Pyrrhic victory, what we can likely look forward to is the erosion of the liberal rules-based order. Now, I'm not making a values judgment either way or saying that's necessarily a good or a bad thing. It just is. I don't know that you can continue to predicate rules-based order upon power that may not be willing to cooperate in policing, which is so interesting to look as the U.S. has begun to slowly decouple from Western Europe, especially. If you look at some of the talks that have happened with NATO and the EU and the tariffs going in, I think we see a very significant geopolitical shift going on right now. And we've seen it with a lot of the talk around Western Europe wanting to get more involved in Ukraine, but they have once again counted on a U.S. backstop in order to ensure that they would not get in water that was too deep for them. And what we've told them is, yeah, no, we're not going to guarantee that. We're not going to be here for you to do that. If you start something over there, don't count on us. It is interesting, though, because people pretend as though all of these rights are universal and that society falls apart without them. But the truth of the matter is that through the course of most of human history, international politics were governed by the strong do as they will and the weak endure as they must. That has been the axiomatic way of geopolitics up until post-World War II. You could have alliances, and that was part of it was, okay, well, if you mess with us, you're also messing with this person. So, we're going to be good neighbors. But we just didn't have it. We didn't have this construct in place. And I think any argument to say that it's an inherent construct or it's, these rights are inherent is going to fail. We can only count on axiomatic justification that we all accept it moving forward. That's not to say that the liberal rules-based order is necessarily doomed to fail. It is to say that the illusion of a liberal rules-based order that was regularly flouted by us is what's dying off. And where we go from here, I honestly don't know, but I don't have a whole lot of other places to go, so hopefully we'll pray that it turns out for the best.